At a restaurant near the station, I found a table inside and ordered. While I waited for my meal, I watched the other diners around me, a family at the large central table, the children drawing new worlds with crayon on butcher's paper, two men at the table next but one sitting opposite each other in animated discussion to nominate the first musical instrument. One insisted on the hands as clappers or as drums, the other on the human voice. Bare bulbs of varying sizes were suspended from the ceiling and lit the room like a celestial constellation by which men at sea might find their way into port. Behind me, pedestrians struck out for home, and I felt that at any moment gravity would cease to weight me to the earth, that I would lift from my seat and drift up past the constellation which lit the children and their drawings into the earth's atmosphere and beyond, out of orbit. It was as if the earth's magnetic field had flipped, as one compasses across the globe pointed suddenly south instead of north. And I felt as I might if I had been marooned on a ship at sea when the earth shifted its weight, so that my maps and my navigational aids, every coordinate I had carefully reckoned and recorded, even the nautical almanac that taught me to read my position in the movement of the stars, were rendered useless, and I was alone, without a guide, trusting my weight to the sea. While I waited for my meal to arrive, I scribbled in my notebook, trying to make sense of this strange sensation. I let thought give way to memory, memory inclined towards thoughts. First of Magwitch, returned to London during a storm that smeared the city's streets in mud, stripped lead from the roofs of tall buildings, tore trees from the earth, and carried gloomy accounts from the coast of shipwreck and of death. Magwitch, who appeared to Pip like a voyager at sea, come from the new southern world many 1,000 of miles of stormy weather away from this one, having been sea-tossed and sea-washed for months upon months. Magwitch, whose return caused Pip fully to know how wrecked he was, and how the ship in which he had sailed had gone to pieces, to feel as if his last anchor were loosening its hold, to understand that he had no home anywhere and that he should soon be driving with the winds and waves. Magwitch, who knew that it was death to come north and came anyway. I remembered travellers' tales that described the narrow stone streets of the 19th century city echoing with calls of coo-ee as Australians out of port sought to find each other and their way in an unfamiliar place called home. And I found myself recalling an early image of the Antipodean. In it, he is hanging suspended upside down, the soles of his feet inverted and pressed against those of another upright man. The Antipodean conjured as a monstrous reflection of the upstanding northerner. And it wasn't difficult to imagine myself into the hanging body, sitting on a restaurant banquette with other diners chattering before me and pedestrians swiftly in motion behind. I felt my legs twitch and then turn. And I imagined that when I finally rose to leave, it would feel natural, if not right, to step forwards out into the street with the rest of my body swiveled back, so that I could see ahead of me a life lived in reverse, a life where the future would be experienced as a void which, if I were to keep moving ahead, I had no choice but to walk into backwards and unseeing. A life in which the present could be felt only as the varying weather on my shoulders, as a shifting breeze or the welcome warmth of the sun. A life in which eyes worked only to see what had already passed, the places already passed through, the people already passed by. My pasta arrived. I put my notebook aside and forked the food into my mouth, chewed and swallowed without tasting, hoping with it to weight myself to the earth. As I ate, I thought of the hanging man. I felt that to be out of place, to be dreamed as a reflection of the upright, meant that everything else was also reflected, also reversed, that to drown would be to suffocate in air, not water. that to experience the vertiginous pull of a geomagnetic pole was to feel the dizzying fall up into the surrounding atmosphere, away from the earth, instead of down with gravity towards it. It was the solitude I minded most. More than the loss of places I knew, more than music, even more than water, I feared the loss of other people. I feared falling out of orbit alone. As I sat at my table, watching the young children opposite me make new worlds out of crayon on paper, as I listened to the man at the table next but one clap his hands to demonstrate an early instrument, earlier even than speech, as I turned to the window behind me and saw lights come on in another building and pedestrians still afoot, falling alone up into space came to feel like riding a near-empty train into an unfamiliar night without the anchor of a silent reader sitting opposite. I paid the bill, tipped, and walked back to the station. Descending in the lift to reach the platform underground, I imagined the cut in the damp clay around and above me, the earth layer upon layer overhead. On the journey home, I pictured the world atop the tunnel, ticking off familiar landmarks as I went, recalling episodes of a life lived overground, using memory as a security against the loss of the earth's gravitational pull. When the train called in at Earl's Court, I stood and opened a window. And between Earl's Court and Hammersmith, I sat alone in the carriage and felt the air ruffle my hair, collecting sounds and smells from the night to connect me to the world and hold me fast. When I stepped off the train at Hammersmith, I didn't think of South Yarra this time, at least not for long. Instead, as I crossed Hammersmith Broadway, I tried to look forward to turning off into the quiet of Rowan Road, to fishing the key from the bottom of my bag, inserting it in the lock, pressing down and slightly to the left to help it turn. I looked forward to closing the door behind me, dropping my bag and flicking the switch to light the room with its single central yellow star.